Okay, now that we know how to factor out the GCF, now we want to learn how to solve when we once we have factored that out. So here are the steps to solving by factoring out the GCF, and I would pause this video and write them down in your notes. So step one, you want to have all those terms on one side of the equation so that it is equal to 0. The next thing you want to do is actually find your GCF, divide it all out, and put it in parentheses. So steps 2, 3, and 4 are the same as the steps that we just previously did. And then step 5, we're going to take each of those factors and set them equal to 0 to solve. So let's take a look at our first example. So step 1 is to make sure it's equal to 0. It is equal to 0, and so now we want to find our GCF. Well, 2 is our smaller number, and 2 does go into 8, so I know I'm going to have a GCF with a 2. And then I have an x to the second and an x. And so we take our smaller one. So 2x is going to be my GCF. So we're going to divide each of these by 2x. Remember, whatever's left is what we put in a parentheses. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. If I have two x's and I take one of them out, I have 1 left over. And then I have, carry my plus sign down. And then 8 divided by 2 is 4. And then if I have an x and I take an x out, I don't have any left. So this is what I am left with. I have now factored out that GCF and it is equal to 0. So those were steps 2, 3, and 4. So then the last step is to take each part of these because we all know that if I multiply this times this, whatever x might be, when I multiply two things together and it's equal to 0, at least one of them has to be 0. So that means either the 2x has to be equal to 0 or the 1x plus 4 has to equal 0. One of them would have to be 0 in order for us to say that this entire equation is equal to 0. So we're going to now solve both of these equations. To get x by itself, we would have to divide by 2 on both sides. But in this case, 0 divided by anything is 0, so x is 0. And then to get x by itself here, we're going to subtract 4 on both sides. And we have 1x equals negative 4. And then if you wanted to, you can divide by 1. You don't necessarily have to, but x equals negative 4. And so those are our two answers. The highest power, so this is my highest power, it's a 2. That tells me how many answers I'm going to have. So since I have a power of 2 here, I should end up with 2 answers when I actually solve. Okay, let's take a look at example B. So the problem with this one is it's not set equal to 0. I would always keep my exponent, the power of 2, to be positive. So that means I'm going to subtract 15n to both sides. But these are not like terms like we had talked in our beginning of chapter 7, since this has a 2, so I cannot combine them, so we're just going to write them in standard form. So we have 6n squared minus 15n equals, and then since that cancels out, that gives us 0. And now that it's equal to 0, we can move to steps 2, 3, and 4. So we look, our smallest number is 6. And so if we think about 6, we have 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. And then if you think about 15, it's 1 and 15 and 3 and 5. So 3 is going to be our greatest common factor there. So we have 3, and then we have an n to the second and an n. And so my smaller one is n to the first power. So that's our GCF, and now we got to divide out our 3n. So this is step 3 of the process. So 6 divided by 3 is 2. And if I have 2 and I take 1 out, I have 1 left. Carry down your subtraction sign. 15 divided by 3 is 5. And if I have an n and I take an n out, I don't have any left. So I don't need to write anything there. So now that it's set equal to 0, now we're going to move to that last step, and that is to set each part equal to 0 and solve each of them. So my first part is 3n, so I have 3n equals 0. My second part is 2n minus 5, and so we set that equal to 0. And then I have to divide by 3 on both sides. So n is 0, because 0 divided by anything is still 0. And then here I add 5 to both sides. So I have 2n equals 5. And then I have to divide both sides by 2. And you can either leave it as a fraction or not, but n is going to be 5 over 2, or you can say it is 2.5.